So let's dive straight in. I want to start with you, Ashwini, because this project was very much a collaboration between SIM and the 4As. It's the latest in a line of projects we've done together. Why was this privacy project so important in your mind for the agency community?
So that was a fantastic presentation with all the X's and Y's. One of the reasons why when you and I chatted, we really wanted to participate in this is, so as the 4As, over 50% of our 700 plus agency members are regional and local agencies. And my colleague Alison Pepper, whom you know, she and I have been tracking the privacy, change in privacy over the last how many ever years. And we started realizing that unlike everything else in the US, privacy is starting to bifurcate, trifurcate, multiplicate, if you will, into very regional applications. Recently, we put out a paper around how the 7 states that have come out with their own privacy laws are starting to affect businesses in those states. And I see several people in this room, including John, who lived through GDPR. And GDPR wasn't supposed to be what it's ended up being right now, right? We ended up giving all business to Google because no one else could comply with those rules and regulations. And the worry is that the US will probably start going that way, which we hope it's not the case, because it's one country under federal law. And so when you and I chatted, John, I was like, this is the issue that I think we all, sell side, buy side, tech side, whoever side, need to be aware of, because it will affect all of us across the board. And specifically to TV, and I'm sure I know we are getting to that through the discussion. It's kind of splitting into subscription-based and non-subscription-based. Subscription, you've given the providers permission to track you wherever. Non-subscription, you can't track me anywhere unless I tell you you can. So guess who's going to win out in this again? Netflix, Amazon, Google, like all the big names one more time. And what happens to the smaller providers who don't have the consent framework in mind? And so for all these reasons, when you chatted and when we spoke, I was like, oh my God, this is the issue that we need to start really getting into. And at least putting out the framework for everyone to be clearly aware of what's coming. And then hopefully, I wish we could create the law, but we can't. But at least we can lobby the Hill to say, look at what's coming down the road if you guys don't really take action. So, hence,
here we are.
Yeah.
So, Ashwini, thank you for that. That's some context. So, Jesse, welcome to the stage. It's great to have you here. We're super pleased to have you guys as members of SIM. First of all, tell us a bit, you've been working in the privacy space for some time now. So to give us a sense, first of all, what you do, and give us a sense of your understanding of the consumer perspective. Obviously, consumers don't think one thing, they think lots of different things. But do you think consumers get and understand some of what Dennis and Julia are talking about?
I would say everything that was just presented, the average consumer has no idea, right, what any of that really means, right? And that's part and parcel to the problem here, right? So privacy by design does not necessarily translate to human by design. So as we think about things like privacy enhancing tech, how do we think about privacy enhancing experiences that actually convey with transparency, building trust to the consumer at the consumer touch point in a way that they understand it, not in the way that we understand it, right? The average consumer is not programmatic. So we can't apply programmatic solutions to people at the end of the day. So we are a platform that is a composable identity management and experience company. So we help businesses, brands, publishers, agencies solve that consumer touchpoint aspect of articulating dynamically at the point of value exchange, the ask, what data is being collected, how's it being used, who's going to be shared with, and then enabling a brand or a business to strategically choose how they present that to the consumer, how it aligns to their privacy practices, and then enable permissioned APIs for usage downstream. Simple, right? Very complex. So what we're finding, though, is consumers care about that transparency and trust aspect of that quotient. Consumers care when their data gets breached, right? My co-founder sitting right up here literally just showed me an email from 23andMe. His data was just compromised. Sorry, Stefano, right? But at the end of the day, that's where consumers feel the impact, when they're all of a sudden they're like, holy shit, I signed up for this subscription service and it was compromised. That's a big data breach cybersecurity issue, but that's also happening at the point of collection. And so that needs to be taken together when we really think about those privacy enhancing technologies and the experiences that capture the data that feeds, right? Data infrastructure. That's what we specialize in. What we are finding is, again, when you are straightforward with the consumer, most consumers are like, oh, that's cool. They're being transparent with me. Awesome. I appreciate that. We see 90% collection opt-in rate. Again, we're not managing the opt-out components here. We're strategically enabling businesses to collect more data, better qualified data to feed their first-party strategies with permissions. And so we're seeing across the board, our experiences have zero downward impact to how businesses deploy these things. When you dynamically ask them in the consumer journey, we're actually seeing an increase of data collection.
And critical to me in what you said is communicating the value exchange clearly.
100%. And that value exchange is very different across the board. Signing up for a newsletter, right, on, let's say, the CNN site is very different than signing up for HBO Max subscription services.
Right.
Regulated by different bodies and entities, different rights that the consumer has. They have no idea what they are, right? But at the end of the day, you have to be really kind of strategic in around how you articulate what you're going to do with data. Netflix has a problem in the fact that they have 250 million people sign up for a subscription service. They launch an ad-supported business. They can't use any of that data to relevantly target those ads. Now they have to go back to consumers and say, hey, can I ask for your permission to use your IP address, video viewing history, email to do relevant targeted advertising? Different body of asks and value exchange offerings.
Super interesting. Dennis and Julia, both Jesse and Ashwini sort of touched upon the fact that the TV marketplace is wide and varied. We have, MVPD services, subscription services. We have a growing range of hybrids with a lower subscription charge and a lighter ad load. There's lots of variety in there. And then layered onto that complexity, of course, is the fact that we have individuals subscribing in family or multi-person households across multiple devices with different accounts. It's really complex. Are the privacy challenges evenly distributed? Or are there parts of the market where realistically we might have more concerns?
Yeah, I'll start off. It is a structural challenge, right? So you think about who has, going back to the framework that we had laid out, think about the relationship between the company that is trying to collect data and the user. Where does that company sit within the flow initially when they collect the data and then when they're trying to deploy it? And a great example is our brand. They're the ones driving spend and market. They're the ones trying to get their message out. And they might have a ton of direct consumer relationships, and they may have collected the appropriate permissions to use that data. But when they go to deploy the data at another time to show a relevant ad to a consumer, to measure and report on that, to do planning and activation, they're actually sitting very far downstream from the consumer and having to go through the OEM and the content provider and the 14 different vendors that they have in between. So they have a major structural challenge. On the flip side, it may be really easy for an OEM or for a publisher or a digital content provider to obtain permissions, but they can't do everything. They can't run a fully ad-supported business without bringing in brand dollars and without using a number of different vendors. So it truly depends on where you sit in the ecosystem, but generally speaking, it's structural and it's about access to that data, communicating with the user, and then being able to use the data after the fact.
And one issue I think we'll come back to, which just before we lose it, is that notion that consent and signals have to be passed down a complex supply chain. Dennis?
I think that's exactly right. And so it's in some ways, TV is evolving to a place where that will be even more complicated. It'll be everything that has been in traditional digital and then some, right, as part of the challenge. that, exactly as Julia said, that if you think about, the screen and, LG or Samsung or whoever actually is manufacturing the screen, they have their own operating system, right? You have different controls in there for, enabling advertising or not, which probably like 0.01%, right, of people actually ever access. It's on by default, right? That's one level. And then you go all the way down into the apps that are in the TV. And then you start to cut across into, okay, now Netflix is an app, but that's a service that I've accessed through multiple platforms. So I actually gave my consent on my phone, right? Or CNN or whatever. So it's this complete mishmash crossover of everything that's in digital plus the TV layer. And I think that's back to your point, Jesse, does a consumer really think that through? No, right? So it's the different players in that whole ecosystem need to be a little bit more coordinated over time, or consumers will never get it and will always be surprised by a breach or the lack that generated some bad.
Yeah. And the one thing to add on to that before we jump over is everyone in this room obviously is coming at it from a strategic and a commercial interest. So talking about these structural challenges and then talking about the various hots, unfortunately, people are not always willing to work together. They don't want to make this work because different people in that chain have different structural, commercial, strategic interests. So it's not like everyone is trying to solve, one Y2K technical glitch. They're actually all looking at this and saying, how can I benefit?
Yep.
How can I take back control of the data? How can I not make it accessible? So I can't emphasize enough for folks in this room, this is not about asking your lawyers to sign a bunch of contracts. This is you thinking about, where do you sit vis-a-vis the user? Where do you sit vis-a-vis the permissions that you got to access the data, and who technically, structurally controls your access to that data and your ability to deploy it? And then you have to think about how to work with them or how to influence them or how to ensure that, you can actually use the data going forward.
And one last thing is, a lot of people talk, we all are thinking about first-party data as a really interesting and important, investment now in the realm of, in the environment of all of these privacy-motivated changes. Who is the first party in everything we just talked about? Right? Is it the TV? Is it the TV manufacturer? Is it the publisher? Is it the brand? Who is the first party?
And that was one of the things I know when I was thinking about this project, that just when you think it through, the consumer experience of managing consent in a family household on a, smart TVs are and MVPD platforms are aggregation platforms. So they have bundles of services, each of which has its own complex supply chain in many cases, particularly if you're executing programmatically, for example, with different consents, different devices, different screens, different accounts. So as a consumer, if I'm in the position where I just want to turn on my TV and opt out of everything, I just really uncomfortable having my data used, that's not straightforward at this point. It's painfully complex as a consumer to do that.
I was just gonna, we're all sitting here talking about the consumer. We are all consumers.
Yep.
Did anyone complain when IDFA went into effect for your phone? I did not. I was like, yay.
This is great.
Exactly. But as a business, it hurt everyone but Apple. And that's, I wanted to make this even clearer if it was not when Julia mentioned that this is about business and cost. Everyone suffered except Apple. The consumer did not complain. We were like, thank you, please take care of this. What else can I give you to protect me? And that's what's coming. And that's why this project is so important, is at the regional, state, local level for businesses, publishers, agencies, advertisers, anyone, shopkeepers, whoever, this is going to affect you, because now suddenly you have to have a grid in front of you saying, my business is in Illinois, but I want to sell in whatever, Idaho. Do I have the permission? I didn't think about this in the past. No one thought about it because we assumed that the federal law protected us across states. Right now, it's not protecting us across states because there are these individual state laws starting to pop up. And so this is almost nothing to do with ad selling and buying. It has, because it will affect everyone in this room. But this is much, much, much bigger than all of that. And currently, the companies that are looking to win are Apple, Netflix, Google, because we signed those 1,700-page agreements without knowing what was included.
I 100% agree with you and cannot support what you just said even more. Because at the end of the day here, I think many of us in the room here have spent the last couple of years finding Band-Aids and workarounds for this issue. Hashed emails, encrypting IP addresses, rotating them around, natting, IPv6, right? How do we continually find solutions for that? But at the end of the day here, we really have to find the solution for getting real, true signals, proof of provenance of the ability to use these signals for the purpose intended and explained to the consumer, period. Right? That's what Apple is doing, right? iOS 17 is going to be another reckoning that ATT framework 14.5 had a massive impact. Literally, NASDAQ companies going down by 25% for a very good reason. It's going to happen all over again, right? Link tracking transparency framework, privacy manifests. Most people right now are not even building for that right now. They're going to be like, oh, wait a minute, what? I need to go now change my entire product experience, not just the pets I use to enable the masking, the hashing, right? The Band-Aids. That's going to be the big awakening. So the next 2 years is the time in which we have to really solve this problem together as an industry, not find more Band-Aids.
And privacy manifest, I think, that's a really good call out, right? That this will mean you have to understand everybody in the supply chain around you, basically. No more excuses, right? Because if you can't declare who you're working with there, you're violating Apple's policy.
100%. If you read into it, measurement and analytics has got to be indicated and flagged in the privacy manifest. If you are using IP address for those purposes, which do get used for reach frequency attribution and relevant targeted advertising, you have to declare it. You're going to have to get consent to use it, right? From your phone and from the OS for the TV. So think about that at the end of the day.
So can we talk a bit about measurement? The kind of cliche in the measurement community is kind of as follows. Panels, fully opted in, permissioned, no problem there. MVPD data, fewer problems, basically no problems. Every major MVPD has pretty buttoned down privacy policies. They take it very, very seriously. They're very cautious. Ish. We'll come on
Your
that.
subscription
Define
service
structural,
that
yeah.
may use
CTV.
information
Define
for
the
purposes.
structural
It's
challenge.
ish.
In streaming, kind of a Wild West. Kind of, this is the cliche. There's a very interesting IAB document, the Crosswalk study that they did, which essentially comes as close as the IAB ever comes to saying it's a shit show. I'm paraphrasing briefly.
You get run over on the
But from a measurement point of view, is that the right way to think about it? No problems here, a few problems, kind of quite big problems, or I know that's simplified.
Yeah, so I'm going to hand it over to you, but the question that Julia asked is probably the question: whose first party is it? Is it the glass? Is it the device? Is it the brand? Is it currently thus far? First party is generally assumed to be the brand or the advertiser. It's their data. Second party is the publisher. Third party is whoever. Third party, da-da-da. That whole first, second, third, fourth is sort of, last couple of years ago, there was a zero party. I was like, now what? Are we going to have -2? Because that's three steps before it even got to me. But that's the question. Is it a Samsung consumer? Is it an Apple consumer? Is it a CNN consumer? Is it a P&G consumer? Like who? And I am the consumer. So I am now at 4 places. I'm like, how do all of you consider me as your first party? What's
Julia?
going on? So up to you.
Yes, please. I think Dennis had a good metaphor of the crosswalk study where people are getting hit left and right in the crosswalk. But taking a step back, again, it all goes back to this structural point of view. So MVPDs insert someone who currently thinks they've got direct access to this information and it's all great because they don't need to use it in real time. That's still, the challenge is still not solved that we've been talking about, that Ashwini talked about. So you can be a first party in relation to the first moment when you collect that data. But if you are not a first party when you're going to deploy that data to use it for planning, to use it for activation, to use it for measurement and reporting after the fact, and then to feed back into your algorithms and everything else you do, you are at the mercy of not only these regulations and the mess that is the various state, federal, and international stuff, you are also at the mercy of these technical policies and technical controls. So no one is safe. And the programmatic ecosystem and streaming ecosystem is maybe messier and it's maybe more obvious that it's messier, but honestly, maybe it's almost easier to solve that because the technology is evolving and changing, and we're all kind of building that plane while it's in the air and moving versus some of these ecosystems that have existed for 2-3 decades. It's a lot harder to rip and replace old technology. I'm looking at Jesse because we worked together when he was at Warner and I was at, AppNext and Sandor. And it was really messy to take apart technology stacks that had existed for multiple decades versus building something original and, at the start where you can start from a better place.
Yeah, and I think there's things happening right now, right, that are signaling what's going to happen in the future, right? The Delete Act was just passed into law yesterday, right? The Delete Act actually means and provides a mechanism for consumers to completely delete all their information and data from every data broker in California, right? There's over 500, right, listed in California that run businesses, including massive providers that everyone in this room probably utilize, like TransUnion is a data broker operating in California. So if a consumer goes in and says, hey, I want all my data out of there, you're not going to be able to utilize in a dynamic measure, in a programmatic way, an update on my audience segments, hydrate that with information that may be provided by that data broker. So again, most data brokers don't own proof of provenance first-party data that they use for their algorithms and their segment builds, right? They're relying on sources. And those sources, in many cases, don't even have those permissions either. So it's, again, there's going to be a massive reckoning that's going to impact the infrastructure, how we operate. Infrastructure takes a lot of time to solve for. So again, we can use Band-Aids in the interim. However, a lot of industries are going to have to really rethink their infrastructure, retool to enable that thing that we saw earlier to really come to life in a way that supports their future models.
And you're really talking, when you talk about workflows there, you're talking about being able to process consumer permissions and changes in consent as laws change, right?
For the Delete Act?
Yeah.
But yes. Yeah.
But it's more than that.
Yeah, more than that.
Yeah, we touched on, the TV is basically everything in digital plus.
Yep.
Just for a bright side moment, the plus piece of it, I think you touched on panels, John, right? So the fact that TV has long relied on panels, the fact that, media mix modeling has been a part of the TV world for a long time. These are actually legs up that TV has over sort of traditional digital, right? That you're not as accustomed to, measuring at the person level, right?
Right.
Your households, your panels, your all of that, right? And you're modeling on top of it, right? And it's that's very significant, and that is now hitting digital hard, right? So that's why media mix modeling has come back, right? It's like we have to model off of a smaller base of users or consumers. I think then on the digital side, and then Jesse, part of what you're getting at is there's a baseline still of consent, right? That's increasingly required going forward if you're going to have identifiable users, right? That you're considering for planning, activation, measurement, all the different use cases. But you will still have some, right? There will be a lot. I mean, good volume, more than a Nielsen panel ever had, right? So, still okay, right? But you still have to model on top of that, and you have to apply, every technology and technique on top of that. You will want to rely on first-party data, defining who the first party is again, right?
So,
and et cetera. So it's all there. So it's again sort of digital plus TV techniques kind of commingling and evolving together is a good thing instead of them being as siloed as they have been historically.
And again, just to be clear, from a measurement point of view, one of the implications of what Jesse's saying and what you're saying is that rolling out a uniform standardized measurement solution that looks kind of the same in every state, theoretically is going to become a bit more problematic. Right?
I think so. Right?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to depend on whether folks go to the kind of lowest common denominator or highest common denominator, and there are some folks fine.
Okay, so we've waved some red flags briefly, so we don't leave in a pit of despair.
A little bit of optimism.
Yeah, so there is a universe of solutions, obviously.
Yeah.
This is Jesse, you've been working on one of them. There are others out there. Dennis, do you just give us a sense, very roughly, what is the kind of universe of solutions that we have to be evaluating as we think about how to deal with some of these? It's funny, we always talk about this as a challenge. We've given consumers the right to choose. That's what consent is about.
Yeah.
And we have to make sure their consent is informed and that there's a value exchange. But it's not a bad thing. It's just something we have to cope with. So tell us about the kind of solutions we should be thinking about. I'm going to ask the rest of you to comment. But
yeah, no, I mean, I think there's a kind of, there are many layers, right, that can start with getting consent for a certain percentage of your audience. And then you can build on that. And for that piece of the audience, you can do everything one-to-one that you might want to do, from planning and activation to measurement, right? Then you model out from there, and you may want to actually, you could still integrate, right, with other data, second-party, third-party data, right, with those consented users. And then it turns into this amazing experiment of modeling again, right? And it could be through clean rooms and modeling on top of that. It could be through MMM. It could be, lots of different forms of modeling that will continue to evolve and become more real time, which I think is a big positive over where TV has been. So you can build out from there, still taking advantage of the first party data, increasingly leaning on consent, trying to avoid the insane grid that you were talking about of state by state by state, platform by platform, by the way. Like, what can I do at this point in the grid? That's kind of crazy. So how do you kind of step up from that, and consider, the first party solutions, the partner based solutions where you can still connect data, the modeling on top of that. It's, there's still a lot of different components there.
Okay.
And even things like attention, of course, are gaining
Yes.
gaining notoriety because you can still understand, right, what's happening.
Well, I think as somebody commented yesterday, if the answer to the question is putting cameras in everyone's living room,
That's the obvious.
probably
Yeah.
not the right way.
Yeah, right.
Julia, anything to add when we're talking about solutions, things to think about?
What I would add to Dennis's great framework that he's laid out is a call to action for companies to bring together SWAT teams, bring together cross-functional teams of folks that fully appreciate your business, what you're doing, the data that you need, how it's interoperable in the ecosystem, and work together. And that cuts across legal, strategy, product, engineering, and make sure that they're all rowing in the same direction and not working in silos. Because whenever it's working in a silo here, that's when things go wrong and they don't realize some of these impacts that we've talked about. But if you can get that right team together, you can work with the right expert, you can really see this, and you can plan out and you can use it strategically to benefit your company.
Cool. Jesse?
Yeah, so building on top of that, I think, the original onset of data clean rooms, good. I think the future evolution of those into dynamic collaboration systems where data doesn't really move, however, you're collaborating with permissioned data to achieve the goals that you're trying to do with your media buys, better, right? So I think we're getting there with some of those solutions. So it's not all doom and gloom. But again, not a lot of agencies, brands, and publishers are set up to operate that way. So it does tie back to, again, kind of proof of provenance of, do we have the data and do we have the permission to use the data by which the teams want to use it? All of that is happening, which is fantastic to see. And I do think there's a lot of great initiatives that are moving beyond the cookie, everything from the ATS framework, right, and UUID. Again, hashed emails, I'm still on them, but at the end of the day, I do think it's a good initiative to get towards the, hey, we have a problem. How do we start thinking about solving it? And then how do we evolve beyond the Band-Aid into real solution?
Ashwin, a final word as we're just about timed out.
Yeah. I think everyone in this room should take this not as gloom and doom, but simply as a
Call to action.
call to action. That's it. Everything that the three of you said, spot on. For all the buyers, all the sellers, please go look at your contracts, check your legal terms, see, where you sit with data ownership, data sharing, data, whatever, anything. I am sure we will sort this out because my glass is always half full. But while that grid is not everyone is looking forward, but that's the grid we are going to live with. And so become familiar with it. I would say for all the agencies, become best friends with your privacy officers, legal counsels, whoever else, and just start figuring out what's in that contract that you're signing, what is it that you're giving up, what is it that you're not, and retweak or re-framework or whatever, revise your existing working processes, if you will. Because this is coming. This is not a discussion of, oh, what if this is here next in 2 years if we get to on the stage together. We'll be talking about how did we deal with 15 states with 15 different privacy laws. This is coming, so we have 2 years. Get your shit straight. I mean, that's all. That's the only thing I can say. And that's what the foray is, tells our members. This is what we work with them extensively. So, yeah.
One last kumbaya moment, maybe, which is partly given my background with heading IAB Tech Lab, can't help but say standards, right? It's what Julia said at the micro level, if you will, like within your organization, work across different teams. Don't try to solve it yourself. At the macro level, this is the call to action is to the industry. And I know that sounds a little blue sky and Pollyanna and whatever, but if we don't work together as an industry, we're screwed, right, on this one. And it's everything everyone else said, but there's a huge opportunity here for standards of practice and for actual technical standards to support all of us in working better together and more consistently. And ultimately, at the end of the day, that even benefits the consumer because there's more predictability in how they experience their choices.
Well, at SIM, we are all about collaboration across the ecosystem, so we couldn't be more excited about this project. Thank you, Julia and Dennis and the team, and particularly James Rothwell, who's been critical in making the whole thing happen. We're really excited by the work and looking forward to presenting it. Greatly excited by our partnership with the 4As, and super excited to see how consent fits into this. Jesse, you'll be here most of today.
Here all day.
Come and grab this man because it's super impressive and interesting what they're doing. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That was the Privacy Panel.